Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we're going to be watching 6 British things that are actually American. Let's get into it.
Hello, I'm Lawrence and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those memos pertains to things and stuff. Specifically, things and stuff that are widely synonymous with one country but, unbeknownst to most of us, were invented in the other. Today, we're going to look at 6 British things that, against all odds, are actually American. And you might be wondering, Lawrence, you're British. Why would you choose to show up your country in favour of the United States? Well, firstly, you hypothetical person, my official nationality is British American. And secondly, I recently gave Britain its due in the much heralded video 6 American things that are actually British.
That's interesting. If you all want me to react to that video, please post in the comments below. I'm curious to see what is actually covered here.
To that video at the end. And if you would like to be alerted about all future videos and haven't had a chance to subscribe to this channel, do that now.
What he said.
In the meantime, allow me to inflate your brain with facts so beautiful they belong in the Louvre or the discount bins at Walmart. When I first moved to the United States all of those years ago, people would ask me, Lawrence, apart from your family and Yorkshire puddings, what do you miss most about Britain? And my answer was always the same. British chocolate. I mean, sure, your average American grocery store might carry 1 or 2 Cadbury.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm particularly familiar with British chocolate. He's referencing Cadbury here, which I have heard of. I'm not sure if there's a particular candy bar or a style of chocolate that you have in Britain that's supposed to be famous. Certainly, I'm not that familiar with it. I think chocolate in America is pretty prevalent, especially in bar form, mixed with like Snickers or Kit Kats, etc. The list goes on and on. We have a bunch of sweet things here. But I'm not entirely sure what's supposed to be famously British, so if you know, let me know in the comments below.
Bars and mini eggs. But crunches, twirls and whisper bars were a lot harder to come by. However, America's confectionery aisles did contain one divisive British chocolate bar that I happen to love. Bounty. Okay, fantastic, I can live with that, except 2 of the things that I just said are completely and utterly a little bit false. The Bounty.
I see, this is the Bounty bar. I was expecting something else, because I would have assumed this was American, just because it's here all the time. It's literally just coconut with chocolate covering on it. So this is pretty common. I think at least in America, I think the almond versions of these are more popular, where it's basically identical chunk of like shredded coconut with an almond on top, then covered in chocolate. I think that's the more common one here. Maybe it's more prevalent in Britain without the almond version, but I'm sure he'll share.
The coconut-filled fixture of UK sweet shelves is not actually British at all, but American. And I know what you're thinking. Ooh, Lawrence, Britain sells M&M's, Snickers and countless other American top sellers. What makes Bounty so special? And in some respects, you raise a valid point, especially since the wrapper is plastered with obviously Hawaiian imagery. You see, I always just thought that this was a product of fantastical marketing. Kind of like how Britain came up with the world's most famous bears despite the total absence of bears in the British.
Wow, I actually didn't realize all of the bears were British. Obviously Paddington, because I think he speaks with a British accent, but I don't think Winnie the Pooh has a British accent, but it's been a while since I've watched, so maybe that is wrong, but that is actually impressive. And I think he's mentioning right now that they don't have bears, which I don't know if that's true. Are there bears in Britain? This would be a very interesting perspective if they just fantasized about bears, maybe from the teddy bear. That's obviously where I assume Winnie the Pooh comes from. I'm not particularly familiar with Rupert, this last bear that he has here, but it's curious if Britain is most famous for bears.
Furthermore, this one is special in part because of its name, which brings me on to lie number 2, the truth of which is this. Americans don't call them bounties. Here, the bar is branded differently depending on whether it's light or dark chocolate, with the names Almond Joy.
Yeah, these are the names that we're familiar with here. Mounds or Almond Joy. Can agree.
And pounds applied respectively. Both were launched in the first half of the 20th century in the United States. And it was only a few years later, in 1951, that Mars Incorporated, which had no trademark attachment to the American...
Yeah, so this is where I think Mars is an American company, to my knowledge, and they have a bunch of candy bars, which is where I assumed this came from.
varieties, launched Bounty in the UK and Canada as straight-up imitations. Sandwiched in between the launch of these sugar-laden chocolate bars was an even bigger killer.
It's a little fun that he's just hanging out here with his cat in the middle of recording his video. I wonder how many takes he had to do in order to get a cat to sit still while he's doing this. It is pretty impressive overall. Maybe I should get some type of animal sidekick for my videos.
World War Part 2. Thankfully, as an antidote to the horror and misery unfolding before them, both countries found comfort in music. Most famously, American band leader Glenn Miller was hugely popular on both sides of the Atlantic, to the tragic extent that he disappeared over the English Channel in 1944. As it happens, Britain's most lauded wartime music icon herself became synonymous with the English Channel. In addition to singing the famous World War II hit and Dr. Strangelove outro track, We'll Meet Again, Vera Lynn soothed Britain with the equally hopeful White Cliffs of Dover. As the Luftwaffe homed in on Britain, who wouldn't have found comfort in the prophecy, there'll be bluebirds over the White Cliffs of Dover? Well, for one, ornithologists, because there are no f***ing
So is this supposed to be about the birds themselves, or is this about the singers? I'm not very familiar with these singers at all, and I'm not sure what the exact point that he's trying to make. Is it the reference of bluebirds in the songs, or is he actually referencing bluebirds existing in Britain or not?
in Britain. In fact, they're entirely endemic to North America, which also appears to have been true of the song's lyricist. After it was released, New Yorker Nat Burton insisted he didn't realise that England didn't have bluebirds. Still, nice sentiment, Nat, if that is your real name. Anyway, speaking of iconic anthems, that brings us on to this. Few things are more British than football, a sport whose origins can be traced back to ancient China. Really? Okay, fine, but few things really are more...
I don't know if Britain can claim football. I'm not... Obviously, we call it soccer here in America as opposed to like American football. But if I think of like a soccer team or country that is famous for soccer, I don't immediately jump to Britain for some reason. I think, well, I don't keep up to date on all the soccer teams, but I'm pretty sure like France was pretty popular in the last couple of years. Obviously, Spain before that. I just generally think of Europe, broadly speaking, and South America as popular for soccer or football, as they say. But I wouldn't say if I would pinpoint it to Britain.
British than football chants and songs. And perhaps the most iconic anthem in the whole of English football is You'll Never Walk Alone. Appropriately, given the song's title, it is also synonymous with more than one British club, with supporters of both Celtic and Liverpool belting it out before kick-off. In fact, the song is so inextricably linked to Liverpool in particular that those 4 words can be found on the club's badge. It is used in reference to the successful 1963 version by Jerry and or the Pacemakers. At the time, Jerry and or the Pacemakers were a popular group from Liverpool, perhaps second only to the auto cues failed. I suppose the people are never going to know the identity of that other group now, and so the song and everything it represents is as Liverpudlian as Albert Dock, except it isn't. You see, unlike the band formerly known as the Quarrymen, Jerry and or the Pacemakers did not write their first few hit singles. And this included You'll Never Walk Alone. But then you knew that if you happen to be a fan of musicals. I once played Prince.
He's actually going pretty in depth here. I was expecting some more obvious items that people thought were British that are actually American, like, I don't know, top hats or something like that. I actually don't know who invented the top hat, but he's going pretty niche into like the songwriters of a European band, of a British band, I think it is, for, I guess Brexit has happened. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm offending anybody by still referring to it as Europe. But he's going so niche that he's getting into the who wrote the song that is predominantly a British band. So I feel like he could have gone for some more obvious ones.
Once Upon a Mattress, so it's a touchy subject. The piece was, in fact, the brainchild of American songwriting duo Rodgers and Hammerstein, who included the track on their Broadway smash Carousel. So how did it come to be an anthem for England's most trophy-laden club? Well, by 1963, Jerry Marsden, this time without his pacemakers, is said to have played a demo to Liverpool's legendary manager Bill Shankly, who was like, "That is an absolute banger, mate. Inject that shit into my veins." Now, we haven't verified the
Oh, he's about to say, I think that he said it we haven't verified that, but I was about to be impressed by how amazing that quote is that they were able to just get from. I don't even think people spoke like that since the photo is in black and white, but I was excited for a second. He had me going.
Of that quote, but rest assured it was along those lines. Later that year, the song, along with other chart hits of the day, made it onto the terraces of Liverpool's Anfield Stadium. And unlike those other songs, it hasn't left since. That's right, even the poppies that are worn by us Brits in the lead up to Remembrance Day aren't actually British. But don't take my word for it.
I actually don't know what Remembrance Day is. Maybe if somebody knows, post it in the comments. Let me know what it is. Is this like a more niche, sort of like a secular celebration, or is this like a countrywide celebration that everybody does every year? Maybe he'll explain more.
Instead, here's me from a year ago discussing it on a YouTube short that you probably missed. Moina Michael was an American professor who pioneered the idea of commemorating soldiers with the red poppy. She'd been inspired to push for it after reading the famed poem In Flanders Fields by John McCrae, himself a Canadian lieutenant colonel, while teaching a class to disabled world.
I see. So maybe this is something like Veterans Day or something like that we have here in America, where it's meant to commemorate veterans, folks who fought in wars, etc. Maybe that's what this is for. But again, let me know if I got that wrong.
One serviceman at the University of Georgia, Moina saw an opportunity to engineer financial support for the wounded by selling poppies. As a result of her efforts, the American Legion Auxiliary and the British Legion Appeal Fund both formalized the poppy as a symbol of remembrance from 1921. While Britain widely persists with the symbol more than a century later, America has long since phased out the November 11th poppy, with some choosing to wear one during May's Memorial Day. Thanks, Past Lawrence, my neck hurts. And now, just like my mate Daz after an hour on the beach, we go from something red to something even more red. But Father Christmas, one of Santa's pseudonyms while delivering presents in Britain, didn't always wear that particular colour. But as I said in 1987 when Santa brought me a protein pack instead of a proton pack, back up there, mate. Because who was Father Christmas, actually? Well, I won't bore you with all of the details because I already did that in this video. But in a nutshell, it went like this. From English folkloric tradition, Father Christmas was indeed the personification of Christmas. Historically, he went by several names, including Christmas Lord, Prince Christmas, and I'm not making this one up, Captain Christmas. But when settlers boarded...
Captain Christmas is pretty awesome. I feel like we should bring that back in America. Captain Christmas. I feel like that could be an action figure. That could be like a movie star. I feel like possibilities are endless with Captain Christmas.
For the New World, they didn't take Captain Christmas with them, presumably opting for an actual captain. There are two big reasons for this. Number one, 17th century Puritans in England had declared Christmas an affront to God, even banning it at one point. And number two, Puritans in New England kind of viewed things the same way. And so many Christmas traditions were shelved, including Father Christmas. But fear not, because 200 years later, with Puritan influence having long since waned,
I'm still appreciating the cat. It's like just barely in frame here, but it is a nice touch, in my opinion. I'm a fan of cats. I'm not sure if everyone agrees, but I think they're a great companion.
He returned. However, by the time he was revived by the Victorians, who often depicted him in green robes and a crown ordered on eBay, the US had moved on to other things, such as the Dutch figure Sinterklaas. And at this point you might be thinking, so what, Lawrence? You lied to us. All this tells us is that Father Christmas is still British. Correction, was still British. because during the 19th century, word of Santa Claus reached England. People seemed to take a shine to him, and although for a while he and Father Christmas remained distinct, our version started taking on elements of that curious fellow from the North Pole. For instance, his crown disappeared and was replaced by a hood, probably also from eBay. His waist became large.
I see. So this is a situation where it started in England, had its own version, changed over time as it came to America, and then Britain basically readopted some of those changes that the Americans made. Again, this is some pretty niche adjustments where, like, I'm not even sure if this one counts, honestly. We'll see where it goes, but taking some adaptations of something that has started in Britain, I'm not sure if that counts as being American.
And his cheeks rosier. And after Santa Claus was depicted in 19th century cartoons wearing red and white, Father Christmas came to follow suit. I didn't intend that pun, but gosh, it was good. And so today you could argue that he remains Father Christmas in name only, hence why a lot of Brits just call him Santa Claus. When you hear the word tea, there's only one country.
Tea bags? Okay. I could see this. This is probably one of the most interesting things so far on the list that I would say when I think of tea, I definitely think of Britain. I'm sure most people do. I think there are some other variations, such as Japan, for instance, is pretty popularly known for drinking tea. And so maybe you could think of one of those other countries, but Britain's definitely up there, definitely top like 2-3 countries for tea drinking and being synonymous with tea drinking. So I definitely wouldn't expect a tea-related American item here. But I was kind of hoping the entire video was going to be things like this.
That comes to mind, Britain. I've just realised that's 3 countries. Nonetheless, the British fixation with tea is very real, dating back to the 1660s when it was brought to England by Catherine of Braganza, the future Queen of England.
1660s is actually, like, that's old in a general sense. Like, that's older than America. But that's not old for, like, worldwide standards, at least.
Just over a century later, Britain was so enamored with tea that Americans in Boston famously copied us by hosting a tea party of their own. And on a personal note, the one thing that Americans assume most about me is that
The Boston Tea Party, he just made a vague reference to the name of the activity. I'm not sure how familiar folks are with this, especially outside of America, but this was when basically America started to rebel against England. They weren't a fan of taxes, so they basically just tossed the tea overboard into the Bay area in Boston. And it was affectionately termed the Boston Tea Party.
tea to coffee, which is only true if I've had 3 coffees. That said, British people do generally love their tea, whereas Americans, more often than not, are indifferent. Instead, the latter love their lattes. And so it will surprise.
I think that is generally true. I think most people in America are generally indifferent to tea. I think vast majority prefer coffee overall, especially iced coffee nowadays. I think that is something that I think of as more standardly American that is starting to take form in other countries now. Tea has some niches. There's some folks who get really into it, especially like loose leaf tea, for instance. So there is some culture of it here, but not nearly as much as other countries.
Absolutely everybody to learn that tea bags were invented not in Britain, but Milwaukee. The first patent, or
Milwaukee. This I could kind of believe. I actually never really thought about who had ever made a tea bag, but it is very convenient, and it's probably... I could see how the tea bag is not a standard tea version. Again, loose leaf tea probably being the more classic, and I think even for folks who do drink tea, they see it as like the premium way of having tea. Like, it's how you should be having it. So I could see how a tea bag is sort of like a step away from classic tea drinking behaviors, which does kind of align with the American perspective on tea.
if you will, was filed in that city in 1903 by its inventors Roberta Lawson and Mary McLaren. Within 5 years, the idea caught the attention of New York importer Thomas Sullivan, who subsequently had them shipped around the world. The tea bags, not the inventors. Today, tea bags are a common household item in Britain, but Yorkshire Tea, which is manufactured 80 miles from my English hometown, owes everything to two people 80 miles from this one. Behold US patent 723287, the tea leaf holder. Is that what it's called? And so, if I've learned anything from this two-part series, it is that both of my homelands have a rich history of influencing each other. In many ways, our special relationship feels more like one of siblings. We might squabble from time to time, but it's only because we can't stand each other. Soon I'll be looking at recent words that Britain took from America and vice versa. In the meantime, if you haven't seen it yet, here are 6 American things.
So I'm a little surprised at the choices that he made for what could be considered British that is actually American. I don't know, what did you all think? Were you surprised? Maybe if you're British, maybe these things kind of ring a little bit truer to home, but those weren't particularly exciting items in my mind. I was hoping for some crazy stuff out there that are very synonymous with Britain that just happened to be American. Would have been cool. But I digress. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please hit like or subscribe. I will see you around.